planet's done its bowing down. And soon the growth returns to follow ground. But I know what's churning underneath the snow. And I love my baby, and we've miles to go. Hey, hey.
Hi folks, my name is Dan Fox and I'm with Boulder Psychological Services. We're here to talk about getting parents on the same page. I have three folks with us that are experts in working with parents and families. Kimberly Bryant is a family therapist and therapeutic educational consultant practicing in Boulder. She's a Naropa-trained therapist specializing in attachment and trauma healing modalities. Kimberly's work focuses on safe relationships as the primary vehicle for change and growth in clients and families. Ryan Dawson is a counselor, therapeutic mentor, life coach, and educator in Boulder. Ryan is passionate about helping people discover a truer self and create deeper relationships. Ryan's extensive experience over 20 plus years of work with adolescents and families includes fitness trainer, swim instructor, basketball coach, liaison in the Boulder judicial system, and individual and family therapist. In addition, he has taught psychology at the undergraduate and graduate levels, as well as presented throughout the community at schools, treatment programs, and community organizations on human psychosocial development and the impacts of technology use on the developing brain. Angelo Ciliberti is a psychotherapist in private practice, also in Boulder, Colorado. He specializes in individuals, group therapy, and family therapy. His therapeutic approach is relational and trauma-informed. He is a regular presenter on psychodynamic psychotherapy, interpersonal neurobiology, and group psychotherapy at conferences around the country. I am very excited to have the three of you on our panel and looking forward to getting into this conversation about how we get parents on the same page. So first question, what are the things parents have a hard time getting on the same page about, and why does it even matter? Who wants to start us off?
I'll go.
Great. Thanks, Kimberly.
So as I started, Dan did a beautiful job putting these questions together for this topic, and as I went through and started answering them, what I realized about this one, what are the things parents have a hard time getting on the same page about? What really struck me is that it depends on how the parents are doing, right? Because when parents are doing well together, golly, they usually can be on the same page about most things. And when parents aren't doing well together, they're not on the same page about much of anything. Grades, tech, food, chores, allowance, friends, curfews, respect, drugs, manners, pressure, consequences. And so I think, getting on the same page allows for not having a hard time in general.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I find myself agreeing with everything that you're saying, and I do think that a lot of what drives the conflict, whatever it may be, boils down to love for the child or the children, as well as a lot of anxiety about how things are going. And I think that one of the things that is so particular to parental conflict is that at the root of it, both parents really want what's best for the child, but they have a lot of differences in terms of ideas about how to get there. So that can show up with boundaries, that can show up with routine. Sometimes one parent wants to be more consistent, another parent wants to be more spontaneous. There can be conflicts around money, and I think often there's a lot of conflict around work and labor, and what is often societally reinforced, as well as what the other person feels like their partner notices and appreciates about what they're doing.
I want to dig into this conflict piece more because it seems like a lot of parents start to get stuck with their conflict and they end up kind of tiptoeing around it instead of addressing it. What kind of suggestions do you have for parents that are caught in this? Ryan?
Yeah, so I think the first thing you have to do is actually kind of take stock of what your differences with your partner are. And so sitting down, when not around the kids, and kind of laying out all the different things that you kind of have rubbed you the wrong way, or you take an objection to, or you're not quite sure about as it relates to your partner and yourself. And oftentimes I see parents, one tends to be a little looser, one tends to be a little tighter, and finding a healthy compromise, once again, outside of the view of the kids, so you can present a united front whenever possible.
I would also say I think a lot of the tiptoeing around conflict ends up being around an anticipation that somebody's going to get hurt. And it really comes down to how a couple is able to communicate and really take the time to actually hear what the other person is saying before responding. And a trap that I think a lot of parents and couples can get into is the desire to be right over the desire to be in relationship with their partner.
I hear that a lot, and I feel like I see this dynamic where, in theory, we want to get along for the sake of the children, but in practice, there's these conflicts that sort of come up again and again, and it seems like try as we might, over time, our kids start to realize where their parents really are aligned and that there is a little bit of division. And I feel like sometimes that can play out to the detriment of our kids. So how do we, if we can't really come to agreement, how do we sort of agree to disagree, keep the peace, keep our kids understanding that conflict is okay and we can kind of keep the family workable?
I think you're talking about a couple different things, but the piece about, distress and conflict are natural parts of life, and how do we, I talk with parents a lot about the lumpy rug, right? Like, we have these situations that arise, and we don't want to talk about that. We don't want to argue about that. Well, we don't agree, so let's just not deal with that right now. And over time, you just have this big lumpy rug, and everybody's tripping on each other and really frustrated. And I think part of what we're seeing culturally as in parenting today is that we're really trying to keep everything so careful and comfortable and easy. We don't want to have to be like, okay, this is hard. Let's get messy. Let's roll our sleeves up and get into it. And we get to work together on this problem rather than you're the problem and you need to change. Like, we actually have something that we need to work on together. And so I think a lot of it is, let's learn how to be uncomfortable and support each other in that, right? But so quickly we turn to avoiding discomfort or blaming each other and hurting each other because we're in discomfort. And if we as adults, as the parents, don't have those skills, then of course we're not going to be able to teach that and do that with our kids.
Yeah. Can I just jump? Obviously, like, parenting children is a huge, huge topic for family health and the sanity of the couple. And it's going to be a place of divisiveness, just two human beings trying to figure out how to solve a problem are going to have different ways to find their way there. But, getting together getting along together instead of through the kids, but for each other, so you can figure out how to be a team. And it's really important to communicate when things are going well, lots of warm fuzzies, and when things are not going well. And that could feel critical. As Duke coach, basketball coach Mike Krzyzewski, also Team USA coach, he said, communicate when things are going well, communicate when things aren't going well.
Mm-hmm.
So, Angelo, yeah.
I think it also comes back to, and this is something I reflect on as a husband, in addition to a therapist, because I realize that it can be so challenging in the moment, but to remember what the priority is when we're heading into conflict. And since the marriage is really setting a tone for the family as a whole, if the priority when faced with difficult conversations is me being right and being heard, that's going to set a very different trajectory for that particular conflict and the working through of that conflict than setting the priority of the relationship really being the kind of guiding principle that a couple's then trying to work around.
So I want to throw an example at you all, and I want to be careful because it's an example about screen boundaries, and I don't want to get into screen boundary philosophy. We have whole other workshops on that. But I do want to bring up a topic that I think is very challenging for many families, is how do we actually have a healthy relationship that we're teaching our kids around their use of screens. So the conflict that I see a lot is that one parent, often the one that is more involved day to day with sort of the negotiation of homework and things like that, often kind of uses the screen as something to just sort of, give out a little bit or kind of have a soft boundary around to sort of coax compliance, but the kid is often a little bit over the boundary, and the other parent, who's maybe a little less involved, gets frustrated over time that the screen is always a daily issue and can come down with this sort of frustrated, like, we're taking this away for weeks. And that dynamic seems to, despite the fact that parents will know their role and know the issue, it seems like it's almost intractable. Do you guys have any advice for this kind of dynamic? I want to just put some teeth into it with an example instead of, just theory.
Well, I can tell you that almost every single day in my practice, I have parents that roll their eyes at me and say, "That's so much easier said than done, Kimberly. Thank you so much," right? But I think what it keeps coming back to again and again is like, here's the tech issue, right? And then there's me and my partner. And we have to work on that together. And we have to agree. And the truth is that this problem is going to keep changing form. Like as fast as we're able to figure out, here's the new boundaries with tech, and here's how we're going to work with it today. It's changing, right? The kids are growing, the situations are changing. Now it's summer or we're vacation. It's just it never stops. So my relationship with my partner is absolutely the most critical component, and figuring out how to work with that day by day. And that's where, the marriage and the relationship, the parenting relationship, even after a marriage, if that's where it's at, requires that we keep coming back to the table with, how do we partner? How do we be a team? How do we be in the lab, doing the experiment to see how we address this issue and come up with the solution to that issue? And I don't think that there's like a right way, right? I just think there's a consistent commitment to keep showing back up, and that's how a lot of families can move through it.
And I think as an extension of that, one of the things that often really, I think, helps the couple to stay a couple is to realize that each of them is right in their own way. They're each often seeing from their own particular vantage point something that's a very valid concern. Perhaps one parent's concerned that there's just too much reliance on screens, or that the screen is becoming a way for the child to regulate, while the other parent is really feeling like that's too rigid and there needs to be more flexibility. Each parent can be right from their own particular vantage point, but it often needs to be, there needs to be enough room within the couple to have that acknowledged rather than have it turn into something so polarizing.
Yeah.
So-
I was just going to say, this is like such a hot topic, and it's not going anywhere. I think that's the first part, is just the understanding that screens are uber compelling, and that they're not going anywhere, and it's going to continue to be a frustration. And the one thing I would add, which is I think kind of more in terms of sparing the relationship, because every time you have to set a limit, it takes a little bit of relational currency, is to do your education, come up with a philosophy that the parents can both agree on what a reasonable amount is, and having some tolerance, but then doing your best to figure out a way to have the software kind of implement those boundaries, because it's much different to have mom and dad coming in and pulling the plug than to have the software shutting off and going, wow, how are you going to learn to work with those limits? But I think the parents first have to agree upon, what's a general philosophy, do some research. American Association of Pediatrics has some nice guidelines. Talk to counselors that specialize in it, that kind of thing.
Nice. So what do we do if the parents aren't going to be in a couple dynamic, right? What do we do if parents have gotten divorced, if they're separated, if the sort of business of parenting needs to go on, but the relationship is not in place? What advice do you have for those families?
Well, golly, if you could know at the outset of falling in love with someone that if you have kids with them, they are not going away, you might make some different decisions. But here's the thing, divorce doesn't make your partner go away, because you really have to keep showing up for your kids. And so maybe you've divorced, but now you still have to keep doing your relationship. You have to keep learning how to work together. And so for a lot of couples who struggled before a divorce, they're going to struggle that much more even after, because now there's, different homes and different attitudes and different styles. But, this is a place where if you are willing to keep at it and make the kids first, put the kids first, and kind of get out of needing to continue to do your dance with each other, but really focus on what do we need to do for the kids. Sometimes parents are beautiful after divorce and how they work together. That's not uncommon. But if you're finding that you keep hitting your head up against the wall, it can be a really good time to get some family therapy or some parent coaching, get some support too. 'Cause it's hard. It's hard on the kids.
Yeah, I think ultimately you don't want to put the kids in a position where they have to choose, because there's a good chance they're going to choose either one or neither. Because there's a lot less stress turning to the peer world, and there's a lot more access now than ever going through, the screen world to find that peer world 24/7. And if, the parents lose their cachet because they are creating so much discomfort with how they're handling the divorce and how they're handling their responsibilities as adults, then you actually have a chance to lose that kid. So.
And I think at this point, we have pretty compelling research that backs up the fact there's nothing more damaging in a divorced family situation than one parent devaluing the other. It puts the child or the children in an impossible position of having to choose between two primary attachment figures. So I think that's one of the main things that I really try to stress to any couple that I'm working with that's going through a divorce or in that position already.
Boy, I think that's great, and it is a heavy lift, like you were saying at the beginning, Kimberly. If it's hard to get along prior to the divorce, it's going to be that much harder. And it is definitely in all the research that interparental conflict is that number one predictor for children of divorce that will predict school success, future job success, relationship success. It's an important thing for us as parents to separate the business of parenting from the relationship. So let's look at the dynamic of a parent that maybe this is with a divorce, maybe it's not, maybe people are together, but there's often been this sense that one parent feels like they're very committed to the process and the other one's kind of alienating or sort of has a different agenda. Sometimes even feels like they're sort of feeding a lie to the kids from the other parent's perspective. How do we kind of reel that in? This is where it seems like, oh, you might not even as a co-parent be able to have a reasonable conversation with the other person about, hey, let's look at what's going on together and try to brainstorm. What then?
Yeah, I think it's challenging. I mean, the metaphor you use, the business of parenting, I think is one that might be a helpful handle for high conflict divorces, in that it really is not a personal matter. It's like, how do you run this operation with immense challenges as best you can, and to keep the dissatisfaction, the slights, any personal agenda off to the side and not in ear of the parent or of the kids, because it's really incredibly stressful on the kid for that.
I agree with all that, and I think that it also creates a situation where it is so hurtful and it's so incredibly aggravating and frustrating that oftentimes the parent wants to kind of emotionally discharge or metabolize their feelings with the kid. And really what needs to happen is for that parent to have access to a lot of other sources of support and resources in order to help manage all of the feelings that get generated.
And I think, in addition to supporting parents and getting out of the fighting and the blaming and the really putting the kids in the middle of things, I think there's also a place where if we can focus on our relationship with our children and we can really seek to make our relationship with our children about our relationship with our children and not about that other parent, our kids are actually deeply wise when it comes to what's going on in relationship. And when we show up and attune to them and keep working on creating safe, healthy relationship with them, they know that. And so if another parent is speaking differently about that to them, it's confusing. It creates so much anxiety and pain, and I really believe that that will trump the situation in the end.
Nice. So let's shift gears a little bit. We've been focused on a lot of the sort of conflict management and ways to kind of work through that and to stay sort of positive and focused on the business of parenting. What about the fun stuff? What are successful strategies for families? What can parents do proactively to make sure things are going well?
I love that question. We don't get to hang out in that question a whole lot in our work. There's some of these cliche things we talk about in parenting, right? Like, 5 positives to the 1 negative, but there's something really important. And you just mentioned relational currency. Like, it's really important that we be having experiences as a family with our kids that are positive and joyful and allow for there to be some levity and gratitude and excitement in life, right? Because without that, what happens? Like, we're all living in this heavy, gotta do it, keep going, push through world, and our kids are now really more and more experiencing that level of crazy stress as well. And so can we give them a break and let them have some joy and some connection and some play in their lives? Because wow, that actually makes a huge difference in how they develop and how their brains grow and how they see themselves and the world and all kinds of good yummy stuff.
Yeah, I would offer that, you know, what we say matters way less than what we do. Kids are watching us, and how we get along with our partner, they're observing, and it's really important to find places where you feel connected, where you feel loving, where you feel at your best, so your kids and your partner can see that, and to be kind of planful about it. We have a busy world. There's a lot of draw on our time, and there's a lot of demands on our attention, and to have moments where we designate just like, this is going to be fun, this is going to be playful, this is going to be silly, this is going to be nourishing, and just plan that in as well, because it's easy to lose it.
I would echo all of that, and I would also say that I think each family plays differently, and how a family plays in a way that is unique to them also helps create the identity of that particular family. And when a child has a sense of belonging to a very particular family that is known for particular characteristics and enjoys playing in a particular way, I think it really reinforces their own sense of identity. So I encourage my families to reflect on how do you guys as a family like to do it?
Let's look at the unique situation of step families, blended families. So oftentimes we've got a parent that's coming in, they maybe haven't been a parent before getting into this marriage relationship, and so they're new to the parenting journey, or maybe they have other children that are integrating with the other parent's children, and we've got a new family system to work on. How do we help step families, step parents find their way to sort of get some traction, get on the same page, and have it work for the family system?
I think there's a natural hierarchy in blended families, and that the biological parent usually is the one that has the most cachet, most currency to spend in the relationship, and understanding that the step parent or the partner that's coming in may be great and all that, but they're not going to quite have the ability to pull off some of the maneuvers that a biological parent typically will, or the primary attachment parent.
I really love this part of the conversation. I want to give a high five out to all of the step parents of the world, because whoa, it is a challenging role to be in. And I feel like, again, like kind of thinking back to this conversation about distress and managing conflict, like, you got to communicate, right? We've got to communicate with our partner about roles and boundaries and who am I to this kiddo and what am I supposed to do or not do, and all of that needs to really be consistent so that everybody feels supported. Because oftentimes what I experience is that the step parents are the ones who end up, because the bio parent is the one who's really kind of the dominant parent, step parents end up taking a back seat, and years later are still in the back seat, right? When that could be a relationship that could be so supportive and so important in that child's development, because it gets confused and it gets a bit stunted because we're not communicating. We're not figuring out how do we do this relationship in a healthy way and coming to the table around that piece. So I just really encourage all the blended families out there to keep talking about how are we connecting, how are we showing up together, where are things getting in the way, and how are we addressing them.
I think it can also be challenging because each blended family and step family can be so different. And there are some families I work with where the children feel as connected, if not more connected, to a step parent than they might have their own biological parent. There are other situations where they actually feel very, very distant and fragmented. So it is important to find out what is particular to that particular family. I think it's also important to have a step parent be very mindful and careful around critiquing or giving feedback to the biological parent around the way that they're parenting. That it can often be a real raw spot within couples that can over time really undermine the foundation of the relationship.
That's
Thanks.
true. Very true.
Boy, all this talk about communicating with your partner is reminding me in my own family situation that, we have 4 children, and the weeks when we're able to check in are so much more functional than the weeks where it's just kind of putting out fires, everything's sort of, getting kids from point A to point B, and there isn't really much time to slow down and reflect on how are things going, where are we at, what can we do for our family system and our process to be able to keep it healthy. So before we wrap, I want to ask for each of you, for families who are in crisis, if they're going through really heavy conflict, difficult times, what resources, what support would you suggest for them?
If there's a way to just look each other in the eye and be like, look, we're on the same team, let's do this together. Sometimes just working to shift the energy of this is so hard and we're like against each other trying to sort through this really hard family thing, but rather, wow, we're actually on the same crew here, we're team, let's work together. Sometimes that can really shift the whole situation already. It's valuable for all families, even if you guys are doing great most of the time, to learn about de-escalation skills, learn about taking space and active listening and validation and co-regulation. Like, these are skills that if everything's nice and easy when your kids are young, you're probably going to need them later, or vice versa, or throughout the whole thing. So really having those skills that help you manage through difficult times, it can never be stressed enough that we as parents have got to take a look at where we came from. What were our parents like? How did they relate? And how is that stuff showing up today? So, when we're in conflict, that might not be the best time to slow down and be, let me self-analyze. And yet, it's really critical. Don't miss that piece if you really want to be a team player for your kids. You gotta look at your work and your own self and what you're bringing. And use us. We're in the community to support you guys. And when things are hard, we step in and join you in it and help you through it as best as we know and are able, and it works.
Yeah, I would say having a trained, objective observer can be incredibly useful. And one of the things is, in doing family therapy, sometimes the child that's acting out, they're the most sensitive parts of the family system, and oftentimes they're acting out in order to bring the family closer together. So if you see kids that are acting out, sometimes it's actually about you and your partner more so than it is about the kid. And it's really important when you start to see the signs of fragmentation, of chaos that feel a little large and feel a little gnarly, is to look in the mirror and say, what am I doing? Am I putting in the time for proper connection? Am I giving support? Am I there communicating with my spouse? And when stuff gets messy, and this is where the objective observer can help, what's a sequence of behaviorally of how that plays off? If I was a fly on the wall, what is the ABCD to the chaos? So just being able to kind of tease some of those points apart, and also to get that support is super useful. So.
And I would really say 2 things. I think number one, being proactive. I think because the feelings are so amplified in our families, because it's so close to heart, it's easy to want to minimize and to avoid how difficult or challenging things are. But taking a very proactive stance in terms of getting support, both for ourselves personally and for the family, is very important. And the one go-to that I really encourage parents that are struggling in conflict is to reflect before responding, to really try to take the stance of reflecting back to the partner what they're hearing them say before they respond. And if a person's level of activation is such that they're getting so angry and energized and defensive that they can't do that, likely that's an indication that the conversation is beginning to move into a place that's going to be more conflictual and fragmenting rather than validating and working through.
Well, thank you all so much. I hope this has been helpful. I want to give a special shout out to the Boulder Valley School District for their sponsorship and letting us use this space. Thanks to Angelo, Kimberly, Ryan for your expertise on this topic, getting parents on the same page. I'd also like to give a shout out to all of our sponsors, the Mamie Dowd Eisenhower Library, Boulder Public Library, the Parent Engagement Network, Horizons K Public School, the Daily Camera, the Boulder Valley School District, Mesa, the Louisville Public Library, the Hope Coalition, the Boulder County Healthy Youth Alliance, Centennial Peaks Hospital, and Expand Mentoring. Thank you so much. We hope this was helpful.
And now the planet's done its bowing down, and soon the growth returns to follow ground. But I know what's churning underneath the snow, and I love my baby, and we've miles to go. Hey, 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 I'm okay. Be with me. We'll beat this, can't you see? So wait a while, winter time. Wait a while, winter time.